when you're working on your website, the chances are you're going to have a specific font that you want to use to display the characters on that page. Now, in order for someone on the other side of the world to be able to see your design with the font that you choose, they have to have that font installed on their computer. Now, clearly that's not going to happen in every case. So what we tend to do is hedge our bets a little bit and supply a list of different fonts to use in case they don't have our first choice. Now, what if they went through the whole list and they didn't have any of those fonts installed? Well, that's where generic fonts come in. And there are 5 generic fonts that we can use: serif, sans serif, monospace, cursive, and fantasy. And the good thing is modern browsers have presets for each of these 5 fonts. So what we can do in the CSS is we can supply a font family and say our first choice is Arial, but if the computer doesn't have Arial, use a different font, and if it doesn't have that, use this one. And then ultimately, if they don't have any of our chosen fonts, we use one of these generic fonts at the end, and we know that the browser will have a preset for that. So we can make sure that our design looks good in all browsers, no matter which fonts are installed on the system that's viewing it. Let's have a look at that in an example. And here we are over at LiveWeave again, and I've just got a paragraph of text that we saw in a previous example, and let's put in a font family. Now, as usual, LiveWeave is helping us, and we can just click on on font family there, and it then pops up a list of fonts, which if you click on one of these, it will actually insert a font family. So let's choose Trebuchet MS, and you can see that it's actually inserted a font family. Trebuchet MS, if a computer doesn't have that, then we want our design to use Lucida Grande. If it's not got that, Lucida Sans Unicode. If it hasn't got that, Lucida Sans. If it doesn't have that, Tahoma. If it doesn't have that, sans serif. And sans serif is that fallback safe option that we know the browser will be able to render. Now, just a quick note there. Some of those fonts are in quotes. Trebuchet MS is quotes, so is Lucida Grande, and this one, and this one, and this one. Whereas Tahoma and sans serif are not. The reason they're in quotes is that the font itself has a space inside. So whenever you include a font with a space, you have to put it inside quotes. When there's no space, then you don't. So just to repeat, this font family, when the web browser is trying to render this web page, it will try and use this first font, which I know is on my system. In which case, if I remove that font, then we should see that Lucida Grande is being used instead. So let me just delete it and watch the font over on the right. There, we've changed. One thing that's very important to remember is that this failsafe, or generic font as it's called, needs to be the very last option. Because if we put it as the first option, then there's going to be a match on every computer, because every computer has that built into the browser. So there we go, now with sans serif. And one of the other fallback options: fantasy, cursive, and monospace. Okay, so if we put these generic fonts at the very beginning, then there's always going to be a match. Therefore, it will always use that. So we put those at the end. Now, you can play around with the font families all you like, or you can use the built-in font families in LiveWeave. But if you type in, let's say, I'll type in Baskerville, which is a font, and it's not on my system, then I'm not going to find it changing. In fact, this font that's being used now, I believe, is Lucida Sans Unicode. And the reason it's being used is that my system does not have Baskerville on, does not have Lucida Grande on. So it's using the Lucida Sans Unicode. But if I put on a font that I know is on my system, then you can see we get the change. So you can have a play around with those and play around with the different font families, or you can just use the ones that are built into LiveWeave. So let's try the Baskerville. Okay, I don't have Baskerville on there. So that one's not being used. So it's going to the next one. Do I have that one on? I don't know. That one, I don't know. Garamond. I think I do have Garamond on. And then Times New Roman if that's not there. And then finally, the generic font at the end. So my recommendation at the moment is just to use the font families that have already been created and within LiveWeave, and just choose the ones that you like. To finish this lecture on font families, let's just go over to one of my websites and we'll have a look and see what font families are being used. Let's just click onto one of the internal pages. Okay, we've got the page here, and I'm going to have a look and see what font family is being used for this paragraph text. So I'm in Google Chrome. I'm going to press F12 to bring up the inspector, click on the little magnifying glass, and then click on the paragraph. Now, down in the box here, we've got the HTML code for the paragraph. You can see the text in there, you can see it's enclosed within the paragraph tags. But over on the right, I can actually see the CSS that is relevant to that paragraph. And if I scroll down, I should be able to find the font family somewhere. Here we go. Font family. So font family, Railway, and if Railway is not on my system, then show it as sans serif. Now we can disable that font family. Look what happens in the preview window above. The font goes back to a default font. But I can actually play around in this window and I can type in fonts to see what my website's going to look like. So let's type in Verdana. And you see the font in the preview changes. Type in Arial. Type in Impact. As you can see, the font is changing and looks terrible. But you can actually do live changes here and see what effect those changes are going to have on the design of your website. I don't believe I have that font on Lucida Grande. So if I remove that, the font won't change because it's actually using the Railway. Let me just delete. You see it stayed the same. Okay, so using Chrome and the F12 feature to bring up the inspector, you can actually play around with the font families and font sizes. You can actually change the font sizes to see what things will look like. This will help you to visually design and modify the changes on your own site. And if you decide that you want to make these changes permanent, you can just go into your site's CSS and make the relevant changes that you had in your preview screen down here. So that's a brief introduction to font families.